Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Theresa Cozart, the Adult Services Librarian for Dare County Libraries, and I'd like to welcome you to Dare County Extension Master Gardeners Winter 2024 Garden Series. Today, the topic is plants that survive and thrive on the Outer Banks. The only rule I have is please hold all your questions to the end of the presentation.
Now I get the microphone. If I can figure out how to get this on.
You can just,
Well,
or I can do it and help you.
actually, it'd probably be easier for you to do that. I can't see what I'm doing.
Teamwork.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lois Chatham, and I'm a Dare Extension Master Gardener volunteer. And today we are going to continue our yearly series that we have been doing for several years now on plants that strive and thrive here on the Outer Banks. So I'm going to share with you 7 plants that we tell you all the different information, and you have that handout on your chair that shows the plants that I am going to be talking about today. But first, before we go into all of those plants, I'm just going to do a little recap on what it's like to garden here on the Outer Banks. Now, I know several of you probably attended the session 2 weeks ago where you learned about all the various challenges we have here on the Outer Banks. But let's just kind of condense it and say that just because a plant does well in one part of the Outer Banks does not necessarily mean that it is going to do well everywhere. In fact, the same can hold true for your own garden, depending on where you live. I live fairly close to the ocean. I get a lot of salt spray, and plants will not survive in my front yard that I can get to be in the backyard because it's more protected from with the house. So keep that in mind. Also, just this past year, they updated the plant hardiness chart. And they used to say we were in zone 8B. Well, now we are in zone 9A. What that means is the average minimum temperature may get between 20 and 25 degrees, but just for a short period of time, not for extended periods of time. Of course, we had that, I don't know, 2 weeks ago, this past week, we had a day that was in the 20s. So that is not unusual. That means that plants that are grown for that particular zone should survive over the winter. So keep that in mind. Basically, that's kind of a highlight of some of the challenges that you might have. You may have other challenges such as deer, because we do have quite a bit of deer here. But let's get started with the plants that we have chosen to highlight this year. The first one we're going to talk about is the Carolina jessamine. Now, this is a plant that a lot of people say it's Carolina jasmine. Either one is fine. And it's probably one of the most beautiful vines that you are going to see in the South. And it was actually named the state flower of South Carolina in 1924, 100 years ago. So this plant's been around for a long, long time. And you're going to see it all over the place. You're going to see it, it covers fences and trees in the woodland. You may see it as a bushy ground cover. And it's probably one of the most beautiful plants because of these golden, bright yellow flowers that you see. It is a native evergreen vine, and it does like to be grown in well-drained, moist soil. It doesn't like to dry out too much. It also needs to be in the full sun. It will tolerate some light shade, but if you have it in too much shade, it will not flower. So pretty much you want to put it where it's going to be sunny. It does tolerate those northeast winds, which is wonderful because in the winter we get a lot of those northeast winds. But it is only moderately tolerant of salt spray. So if you live close to the ocean like I do, this may not be a plant for your particular garden. I said it was a vine, and it can grow anywhere from 12 to 20 feet. has these wiry stems that twine around all kinds of stuff, whether it's other plants attached to a trellis, an arbor, a tree. And it is very, very beautiful, and it can also be grown as a ground cover. Now, one great thing about this particular plant is because it flowers so early in the year. You want to fertilize it lightly when it starts to grow, but you don't want to put too much fertilizer there, because then what's going to happen is you are going to be putting a lot of growth into the foliage and not the flowering. So keep that in mind. So it will flower from February to April. One of the first plants that come out and give us some color in the year. And it attracts a lot of different pollinators, hummingbirds, butterflies, bees. So a great addition to a pollinator garden, if you have a pollinator garden. If you want to prune it, which you don't need to really, unless you're just trying to train it, or if you have it as a ground cover and you're trying to keep it within bounds, we suggest that you prune it as soon as it flowers, that finishes flowering. And if you are pruning it back because it is a ground cover and trying to cut it back, don't cut it back more than 3 feet. Don't cut it all the way back to the ground, and it will continue to grow and do well. One thing to be concerned about with this plant is that it is highly flammable. So we don't recommend that you put it on your house. Actually, why would you want to? Because this is a plant, it's cold outside. It starts flowering in February, and you're inside the house where you're nice and warm and you're looking out. Wouldn't it just be wonderful to have it where you can see this beautiful plant in bloom, and it makes you feel like spring is actually coming? So another reason why you don't want to put it up close to your house either. One other thing to think about with this plant is that all parts of the plant are poisonous if you eat it. So don't eat it. Don't allow children to suck the nectar from those flowers. And if the sap gets on your skin, it may cause a rash. So that's sort of a negative to this plant. But a very positive attribute of this plant is that deer and rabbit tend to leave this plant alone. And if you're like me, you're always looking for plants that the deer will not bother. Also, it really doesn't have any serious pest or disease problems, which is another benefit for this plant. Now, there are various different cultivars out there. Some that you may see out there, the Pride of Augusta. This one has a double flower, sort of looks like a miniature rose. And it actually will stay in bloom longer than some of the other varieties that are out there. Margarita, the one down on the lower, when you're looking at it left, I have to turn around to see, is a single flower. And this particular one is more cold hardy than some of the others. So keep that in mind as well. And if you're looking for something that is probably not as vibrant yellow, you may want to consider this pale yellow. It has more of a creamy yellow flower to it. And that one is not as cold hardy as some of the others. And then a different cultivar other than the Carolina jessamine is the swamp jessamine. It's very similar to the Carolina jessamine. It looks just like it. It will bloom both in the spring and the fall, but the flowers are not fragrant. The blooms on a Carolina jessamine are very fragrant. However, you may not be able to find this plant at the local nurseries and things. Recently, it has been put on the North Carolina Special Concerns list, which means that it's very difficult to find this plant. So if anyone has the plant, you would probably want to maybe propagate it, maybe call us, we'll propagate it for you. So that we can help this particular one continue to stay in our environment. Moving on to the next plant that we chose this year is the blue false indigo, which is in the Baptisia family. This is a native perennial that grows into a bush-like appearance that can get anywhere from 3 to 5 feet tall. And in the fall, the leaves are going to turn black and then they're going to drop off, but that's okay. It will come back next year. It really doesn't care what kind of soil you have it in, although we do recommend that you amend your soil because all we have is sand. We really don't have soil. And it does like full sun to maybe partial shade. This plant also will suffer if it's in too much shade. If you have it in too much shade, it is not going to flower as well. It may get long and leggy and need to be supported. So that is something to keep in mind if you when you are planting it. Another thing to be concerned about with this plant is that it has a very deep taproot and an extensive root system. So before you put this in your garden, think about how large it's going to get and give it enough space, because once it is established, it doesn't like to be transplanted. And it may take up to 2 years before you see the first bloom after you plant it, because that first year it's putting all of its energy into that extensive root system. So don't be concerned if you don't see any flowers that first year. Has these bright indigo blue flowers that appear in the early spring, and they last about 2 weeks. Beautiful, beautiful flowers. And the flowers actually were used by Native Americans years ago for blue dye. So this was one of the plants that they used. Actually, I think we have a master gardener that dyes things and goes and collects various different flowers to have the different colors as well. It does attract many different types of pollinators. It doesn't have any major pests or diseases, which is wonderful. Very tolerant of the drought, salt, and it's also deer tolerant. Downside is that you don't want to eat this plant either, because if you eat it, it is poisonous. All parts of the plant are poisonous. Now, after it flowers, these seed pods will appear. And those seed pods will change from green to black toward the end of the summer, early fall as they mature. And the pods oftentimes are used in flower arrangements. They're very attractive, actually. And years ago, going back to those Native Americans, they used to use these pods once they were mature to amuse their kids as rattles, because the inside of the pod holds the seeds, which are like kidney-sized seeds. And once it dries and you shake it, it sort of sounded like a rattlesnake. And so they gave it the name of rattlesnake plant as well. So you may hear it called that once in a while. If you don't take the seeds off, it may be very aggressive in your garden, because when that pod opens up, the seeds are going to spread throughout your garden and pop up plants various different places. And if you're trying to maybe encourage more, then leave the pods on there. But if you do not want them to take over your garden, we suggest that you prune it as soon as it finishes flowering, and that will prevent the pods from forming. So then you don't have to worry about getting out there before the pods open up. Taking a look at some of the various different Baptisia that are out there. There are different types, different colors. The one that we highlighted was that vibrant blue because it is so beautiful. But there is several ones that are out there. The Baptisia alba is a wild white indigo. And the stems on this are kind of a charcoal gray, very beautiful plant. Also, the Baptisia bracteatia is a creamy white plant. It's not white and it's not yellow. It's got a creamy flower. If you're looking more for a yellow flower, you might want to consider the Baptisia tinctoria. This plant is not quite as tall as some of the others. This one only gets to be about 2 to 3 feet tall. An interesting one is the Baptisia cherries jubilee. Isn't this an attractive looking plant? It starts out with these deep maroon buds, and then when it opens up, it opens to bicolored flowers of maroon and gold. Very, very attractive plant and interesting. And then if you're looking for something in a different color, you might want to consider the Baptisia purple smoke, which is a dusty purple. This one also has those dark gray charcoal stems as well. There are probably 30 different cultivars of Baptisia on the market, and many of them do very well here on the Outer Banks. So a plant that you might want to consider for your garden. How many people have a gardenia? Quite a few, quite a few. Actually, gardenias are not native to North America. They originated in southern China and Japan, but they do very well here in the southeastern part of the United States. It is an evergreen shrub that has these fragrant, creamy white flowers and the dark emerald green foliage. Beautiful, beautiful plant. However, they're really not the easiest shrub to grow, and you really need to know certain things about this plant in order to have it survive year after year. Many of us probably, our grandmothers probably had this plant. It's been around for a long, long time. So when you consider, if you're going to consider having a gardenia, you just need to consider a few little things and make sure that you attend to those types of things. It doesn't like the full sunlight. It likes partial shade or indirect sunlight, because intense sunlight is going to burn the plant and cause it a lot of stress. So you probably, if you have it in the full sun, you probably aren't going to get it flowering quite as much as you would if it's in partial shade. Now, there's different cultivars out there, and depending on the one that you choose, they may grow anywhere from 3 to 8 feet tall. And you don't want to put this someplace where it is in competition with tree roots or other things like that. It doesn't like that because it has shallow roots. It also does not like those cold northeast winds. So you need to protect it from the cold winds, because if they get those winds, they possibly will get leaf burn on it. And it may even kill the plant. Now, the dwarf varieties are really not as cold hardy as the other varieties that are out there. It does like moist, rich, acidic, well-drained soil. And we suggest that you fertilize it in the spring with a balanced azalea fertilizer, not just a balanced fertilizer, but one that has additional properties in there to help it. And then about 6 weeks later, fertilize it again, and that will encourage more flowering. But you don't want to fertilize it too late in the year, because that is going to then encourage new growth, which is going to be very tender and perhaps will not survive over the winter. So don't fertilize it too late in the year. If you are going to prune it in the spring, and that will help it to maintain its shape. And it also will help to stimulate more flowers to form. So that is when you would want to fertilize this plant. It is moderately drought tolerant, but in our hot, hot summers when we don't have a lot of rain, you probably are going to need to water it weekly. A great attribute about this plant, and I have lots of deer problems, so you're going to hear me talk about that, is it is a deer resistant plant. The deer tend to leave it alone because of the fragrant flowers. So that is a great attribute to this plant. It also attracts many different types of pollinators, which is another great plant for a pollinator garden. After it flowers, it may form these hips that provide food for our wildlife. So another benefit to the wildlife. It also has a few little different pest and disease problems. One of the most common is the white fly. Now, the problem is with the white fly, it feeds on the underneath side of the leaf. And so you really don't know you have a problem until it has become a real problem, and the top of the leaf then gets spotted or very pale, and you wonder what's going on. But it's easy to treat. You can use insecticidal soap or horticulture oil and make sure you spray the underneath sides of the leaves. and that will control that pest. Aphids may also be a problem. You will control it exactly the same by using insecticidal oil or insecticidal soap or horticulture oil. And it may experience root rot if you have it in soil that doesn't drain properly, because there are a lot of fungi that live in the soil and it is susceptible to that. So make sure that it stays damp maybe, but not wet. There's a lot of different cultivars out there. Some have single flowers and some have double flowers. Probably the one that is most familiar is the Mystery. That is probably the best known selection out there. It has these 4 to 5 inch double flowers that are very fragrant, and it grows about 4 to 6 feet tall and 3 to 4 feet wide. So make sure that you have adequate space for the plant. If you're looking for something that is a little smaller, you might want to consider the Crown Jewel. That one is also a double flower. And that one is smaller. It only grows to about 2 feet tall, but it gets 4 feet wide. So that one you have to really be concerned with in your garden because you have to give it room to spread. A single flower, the daisy, is another small cultivar. I don't know that I have actually ever seen a single flower gardenia. Every gardenia that I have seen it's been the double flowers. This one is a smaller cultivar, but it is not as cold hardy as some of the other small cultivars. It gets about 3 feet tall and wide, but it is one that you may see out there. And then a very interesting one is the Golden Magic. This particular one only grows to be about 2 to 3 feet tall and wide. And it starts out as this creamy white flower, very pretty. And as it matures, it changes to a creamy yellow and then to this golden yellow as it is fully mature. So something that can really add a lot of interest to your garden if you're looking for something a little different. Going on, if you're looking for a shrub that is tough, beautiful, and undemanding, this may be the plant that you want to consider. The Glossolabilia. This actually was developed as a hybrid from a couple of other abelias, and it offers year-round interest to your landscape. It is considered a semi-evergreen in our area, which means that it possibly could lose up to 50% of its leaves if we have really cold winters. It doesn't typically lose all of its leaves. In warmer temperatures, it is an evergreen. So if our winters are not that cold, it may be completely evergreen where you don't lose any leaves, but don't worry if you see leaves dropping off. That is not going to hurt the plant at all. It does prefer the full sun. But you can also grow it in light shade. If you have it in too much shade, it starts getting very thin and very unattractive, and it doesn't flower. So you don't want to have it if you have a lot of shade. It is a plant that can grow anywhere from 2 to 6 feet tall and wide, and it does like moist, well-drained soil. So again, one that you don't want to dry out too much. Now in the spring, the foliage will emerge as a maroon and fades to a green, lending a kind of a reddish tint to this plant during the active growing season. And then in the fall, the leaves turn to these fiery reds and crimsons, giving your winter garden a lot of interest. It has these small pink bell-shaped flowers that are very fragrant, and they bloom continuously throughout the warm months. So it is a great, great plant for our pollinators. They love this plant. It will benefit some from pruning in the spring because if you thin it out a little bit, It allows light to get into the inside of the shrub and also will encourage more bushy shrub instead of, just the stems that are there. I mentioned it attracts all types of pollinators. It is actually a host plant for some butterflies. It has no serious pest or disease problems. It is resistant to root rot. It is drought and heat tolerant once it is established. Now, when we talk about once it's established, that means the first year that you put it in, you are going to have to keep it watered periodically to make sure that it stays healthy. But once it's established, it is very drought tolerant and it's also salt tolerant. So a great plant for our area. But if you are in an area that occasionally gets flooding from the sound or the ocean, this is not the plant for you, because even though it is very tolerant of salt spray, it does not like salty soil. And so that will kill the roots. Keep that in mind. Another attribute is the fact that deer tend to leave this plant alone as well. Some of the cultivars that are out there are many different ones that have different shrub sizes, flower colors, the color of the foliage in the fall. Some that we chose to highlight today is Rose Creek, which is a compact shrub that only grows to about 3 feet tall and wide. Very attractive. The Edward Goucher has lavender pink blooms and the showy red sepals. And this particular one gets from anywhere from 2 to 5 feet tall. Kaleidoscope is an interesting one because it has variegated leaves. Most of the others are going to be solid green or red, changing to those green. And this particular one has colors of red, orange, rust color of leaves in the fall. Great looking plant. The Sunshine Daydream is a medium-sized shrub that gets to be about 4 feet high and wide. And the foliage starts out on this plant as a dark pink, and it ages then to this variegated leaf that is yellow and green and pink. So very interesting plant to have. And then another one that has variegated leaves is the Hopley's Twist of Lime. It also is a more compact plant that is about 4 feet tall and wide. But there are a lot of different ones out there other than the ones that we've chosen to highlight here, and they will do well here on the Outer Banks. Now, when you hear dogwood, many people think only of the dogwood tree. We're going to be talking about the red twig dogwood, which is a shrub. It is a native deciduous shrub. It's a large multi-stemmed shrub that is actually native to North Carolina. It does best in the full sun, but in our hot summers, it may benefit if it has a little bit of shade during the hottest part of the day, because it may have some stress when it gets that hot sun on it. It really doesn't matter what type of soil it is in. It does well in wet to dry soils. So it does pretty much better with constantly moist soil, but it will tolerate the dry soil. It also will tolerate occasional flooding. So if you have an area in your garden that gets puddles of water whenever we have heavy rains and that water stands for maybe a day or a day and a half, this may be a plant that you might want to consider putting in that area because it will tolerate that wet soil as well as when it dries out. So great plant to have. It can reach up to 6 to 9 feet tall and 5 to 10 feet wide. Now, when the new growth comes out, it has these showy red stems. And then as they mature, they turn to brown. So the brightest color is going to be the newest stems that are out there. And we suggest that you prune this early in the spring and prune back the oldest stems, maybe a third of the stems that are out there. Very easy to know which ones are the oldest stems because they're the brownest stems. They're not going to be the red. And because it does lose its foliage in the wintertime, the stems are still there. So it actually does give some interest to a winter garden because of the red color. It is also very resistant to deer and the wind, so not one that you have to worry about there, but it is very sensitive of salt spray. So you don't want to have it in an area where the salt is going to get on it. Now, in the mid to late spring, it has these tiny flat-topped creamy flowers that attract all types of pollinators. And again, another addition to a pollinator garden. It is also the larva host for this spring azure butterfly. So you may want to try to attract some butterflies. In the fall, the leaves turn into attractive shades of yellow, orange, or red that then fade to more of a burgundy purple. So giving you some different interest in the fall. And then in the fall, these white berries are going to appear, and that provides a food source for our wildlife in the wintertime. So, and the fall and the wintertime. So a great, great plant to have. And because it has all these stems that are rising up out of the ground, it is a great plant for nesting birds. They will go in there and that gives them some protection as well. Now, there's various different cultivars out there. The Kelsey is a compact shrub that gets to be about 3 feet tall and wide. And most of our redwood dogwoods have the red stems, but there are some that end up having yellow stems. This particular one, the silver and gold, is in the red twig dogwood family, but it has yellow stems, and it also has a variegated leaf. In addition to that, there are some that are yellow twig dogwoods. Rather than having red stems, they all have the yellow stems. And so those are going to be more of a greenish yellow stem, and the foliage on that is probably going to be more of an orange in the fall. So if you want a shrub that offers a lot of different interest, and maybe it doesn't matter whether it has leaves on it in the wintertime, but it still has color, you might want to consider having a redwood dogwood and a yellow twig dogwood, and that will really give you some additional color in the wintertime. Moving on to the persimmon. Now, persimmons can actually be divided into 2 distinct groups: the native persimmon, which is the American persimmon, and the Oriental persimmon. And we're going to talk about the native persimmon today. It is a native woody deciduous tree, and it does like moist, well-drained soil, and it does well in sandy soil, in full sun or partial shade. Typically, it can reach anywhere from 30 to 80 feet tall and 20 to 35 feet wide. But in our kind of harsh conditions here on the Outer Banks, you're probably not going to see it get that tall. It probably is only going to get to be about 15 feet. You really don't need to give it a whole lot of fertilizer. It doesn't require a whole lot of care. And it also doesn't need a lot of pruning. You only probably would want to prune it if you have crossing branches, or if you have branches that have died back. So it doesn't require a lot of care. It attracts all types of pollinators because of these creamy bell-shaped flowers. And it is the larva host for the Luna moth. and also the regal moth, which you may see this hickory horned devil caterpillar on. That is also another moth that it is a host for. One thing to keep in mind is that persimmons are dioecious. Now, what does that mean? That means that you have to have both a male and a female plant in order to bear fruit. And only the female bears the fruit, but you must have both. And we suggest that you plant them about 20 feet apart because you don't want them to crowd each other. When you go to the nursery or whatever to buy this plant, they should have it marked on the tag whether it is a male or a female plant. The fruit comes in the fall. They flower in the spring, and then the fruit is in the fall, but only on the female plant. Now, if you go in the springtime and it's starting to bloom, you can easily tell which one is the male and which is the female. The male plant is going to be the plant that has a cluster of blooms, 2 to 3 blooms together, whereas the female has a single bloom, as you see here on this slide. So very easy to know whether it is a male or a female plant by looking at the blooms. Keep in mind that the American persimmon does not bear fruit right away, and it depends on how it was propagated as to when you might get some fruit. If it was grafted when they started out this tree, it may take 3 or 4 years before you see fruit. And if it was started from seed, it may take all the way up to maybe 9 to 10 years before you will get fruit. So don't expect to get fruit the first year you are putting this tree in. Be patient, and it will, if you have both male and female, it will produce fruit. I've heard a lot of people say that the native persimmon is not very sweet and doesn't taste very well. And part of that is because people pick it way too early. The native persimmon has fruit that is probably the size of a plum. It's not a huge fruit. And it has to be completely ripe before you want to eat it, or it will be very untasty. I have never tasted one, but it is not good at all. And that's probably why a lot of people think, oh my gosh, this is not, you don't want one of those because it is very bitter. So how do you know when it is completely ripe? Well, the skin starts to wrinkle and it becomes soft. And if you pick it before that, that's fine because they continue to ripen even after you pick it off the tree. There is a misconception out there that you don't want to pick your fruit until after the first frost. However, that is wrong because if it's still on the tree, that frost is going to harm the fruit. So you want to actually pick the fruit off the tree if you want to eat it before the first frost. Now in our area, the first frost can occur anywhere from say mid to late November. It used to be mid-November, but it's getting later in the year now than it used to. So that is something to think about. But it's okay if you don't want to eat the fruit and leave the fruit on the tree for the wildlife, because it is a great source for our wildlife in the wintertime, and it is not going to hurt that fruit for them. They will enjoy having it. Now, it's probably one of the easiest trees to recognize by looking at the bark because it has these distinctive, thick, dark gray to black, kind of square-shaped blocks that sort of resemble a checkerboard, or as many people think, alligator skin. So a lot of people say it has alligator bark. I'll put a picture there for you to see what it does look like. And in the fall, these leaves turn to a golden yellow or orange red color. Very, very pretty tree in the fall. It does have some insect and disease problems. It could develop fungal leaf spot, twig dieback, or powdery mildew. If it does, then you can call on the master gardeners and we can help you to treat that, tell you what to do to treat that particular problem. But because of the spectacular autumn foliage that is out there and the fact that the fruit is later in the year, it is a great addition to an edible landscape, providing additional food later in the fall. And then the last plant that I'm going to share with you today is the Florida anise tree. Now, this is native to the southeastern United States, and you can probably know that it was probably first appeared in Florida since that's part of its name. So it is a native evergreen shrub. It is kind of depending on the cultivar you have, it may get to a medium to large shrub. I think probably in our area, most of ours are probably medium size. It's best to grow this in part to full shade because the leaves may get scorched if it's in that bright sunlight. So those of you that have a shady garden, this may be one for you. It is very drought tolerant. It is not drought tolerant. And it requires moist, rich soil. So this is not one you want to dry out too often. And again, when you have a shady garden, you tend to have more moist soil. Unlike me, that has no shade, that always having to water to get it moist. It is a rapid grower and gets anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall and wide. So another thing to keep in mind. Now it has these shiny, leathery, olive green leaves that are darker on the top and pale underneath. And if you brush up against this plant and the leaves get crushed or you bruise the leaves, it kind of smells like black licorice. Not a bad aroma. It is poisonous if you eat it, so don't eat this as well. Don't mistake this plant for the star anise herb that you use in recipes because it is not that plant. It is very deer resistant because of the aroma. And that it also contains high compounds of aromatic compounds in it, and that tends to help resist insects and other diseases that it may have. It blooms in the late spring, April and May. It has these 1 to 2 inch wide star-shaped maroon flowers. Very kind of unique flower. But one thing to keep in mind about the flowers, it's sort of the opposite of the leaves in that it is a very unpleasant smelling flower. The foliage is great, not so much for the flowers. And then the flowers will develop into these star-shaped pods later in the summer. It does tolerate the heavy shade, erosion, and wet planting sites. So again, another plant that would be good for that. But it is not quite as cold hardy as some of the other plants. But it should do well in our zone. Now, various different cultivars that are out there. One is the pink frost. It has these burgundy red flowers and creamy white variegated foliage, a little different. And the foliage then turns kind of a rose pink in the fall. There's also some out there with other colors, such as the alba, which is a white flower on this plant. And the leaves on the alba actually are yellow when they first appear, and then they turn green. So kind of an attractive plant to have. There is a yellow anise tree that are great. They have kind of a yellowish green flower. And then there are some that have variegated leaves, such as the southern star. So another plant that may be of interest to your garden. But again, this particular one does not like the full sun. These are some of the references that we use to create this. On your handout, I have listed the NC State Toolbox, which is the second resource there. And that will give you all types of information about plants. So you have that to take home with you. And if you also have additional questions after today, you can call us at our Ask a Master Gardener line, which is, well, what did I do? I went back. 252-475-9245, or send us an email at greenlineobx@gmail.com. There also are other ways that you can get in touch with us, is that mid-March through mid-November, we have a table set up right outside the Arboretum at the Baum Center on Wednesdays from 9 to 11. So you can visit us. And then one more additional place that you can talk with us is we have a Coastal Gardening Festival May 18th this year. It's always the Saturday after Mother's Day. It's on the grounds of the Baum Center. And we have a booth set up at that event, and also a lot of plants to offer. So I'm going to open it up for questions. And if I don't remember, please remind me to repeat the question that is coming from the audience, because those of you that are on Zoom cannot hear that. And sometimes I do tend to forget. So I'm going to take one from Zoom, and then I will take one from the audience. Okay. The question here is, first question is, do the Baptisia cultivars propagate from seed, or are they sterile hybrids? They do propagate from seed, although sometimes they're very difficult to grow. Where can you purchase the plant? They're available at various different nurseries, and we may or may not have a plant available at our plant sale. I don't know what plants we're going to have for sale, because we do propagate our own plants. So I'm going to take a question from the audience. Yes.
Most of these plants and shrubs do well in containers.
Okay, the question is, well, most of the plants that I highlighted today do well in containers. Yes, they will. Most of these, of course, the tree is not.
Right.
But yes, most of these plants will do well in containers. I do have my gardenia in a container, so that does well again, but you just have to make sure it's got the right other conditions out there. Okay, another one from Zoom is, are the plants you say are poisonous, are they also detrimental to dogs? And the answer to that question is yes, they are detrimental to dogs, pets, or any other animals. And I mentioned that the deer tend to leave them alone when they're poisonous, and they tend to know which plants are. So yes, the answer to that is yes. Another question from the audience. Yes.
Bosgabelia, it says to prune it in spring, but it grows the flowers. Does it bloom summer or fall, or when does it actually bloom?
Okay. The question is, let me see if I can remember how the question was phrased. It was suggested to prune it when it was growing, and wanted to know when do the flowers appear. The flowers are going to appear in the springtime on the abelia.
So you would prune it after it flowers.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Question from Zoom. Can you offer any insights about plants that do well with sound side flooding, and insights about false petunia? This is a question that needs to be answered off-site, and we recommend that you contact us with our email because because of the limited time now, we're going to address questions pertaining to the flowers, the plants that we talked about today. Okay, another question from Zoom is the gardenia, I can't even talk, is the gardenia salt tolerant? No, it really does not like the salt spray. And that's one of the reasons why I have it in a container, because I do have salt spray and I need to make sure that it stays away from that area.
What about occasional flooding every 10 years?
Question is, what about occasional flooding? You're still talking about the gardenia? To my knowledge, gardenia, the salt soil, if you rinse it off, it is not harmful to the gardenia. But I've not known for it to kill the plant. Okay. That one was a question that was not for this particular plant. Okay. Another question that came in from Zoom pertains to hydrangeas, and that is another one that I'm going to suggest that you contact us, and we will be happy to answer that. Any other questions from Zoom? Okay, 2 questions over here. I think your hand got there a little quicker than his. It could be one or the other. You know, they look very, very similar. And so I don't know the answer to that question. Oh, I forgot to repeat the question. Sorry. The question was, is the gardenia, the jasmine that you see in the woods growing up the trees, is that the swamp jasmine? I don't know if that is the swamp jasmine or the Carolina jasmine, because they look very similar. So it would just have to be tested, I guess, or if you're there and you determine whether it has a fragrance or not. If it's blooming in the fall, it is a swamp jessamine, because the Carolina jessamine only blooms in the springtime. Okay, and sir. How large does the kaleidoscope abelia get? You know what? I am not sure. Let me see if I can find that one. If I have anything written here on that. The kaleidoscope abelia. Okay. Okay, great answer. See, that's why I bring helpers with me, because I don't know everything. And so Kay Lowerly has said she has experience with that because she has one in her yard. And it gets to be about 3 feet tall. And that is for the kaleidoscope abelia. I forgot to rephrase the question. You have to remind me. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
What's the dogwoods do well here?
I am not familiar with that. Are you familiar with that, Chris?
No. No, I've not tried the Crucial dogwood. I think they need a cooler environment, and now that we're changing so much, I don't know how any dogwood's going to do well down here. So, you know, we're looking into research on that item too.
The beautiful one I want to bring with me, it's a weeping berry.
Oh, that would be beautiful.
Hot,
That would be beautiful.
got a big sucking, a big pot.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you could try it. Just put it in a protected area.
So any other questions? Yes, there's one over here.
Are they poisonous for animals?
But no, but I don't, the glossolalia, the question is, are the glossolalia poisonous to people and animals? No, they are not. It would tell you that some of these questions that you have, maybe you think about later, You will find the answer to those questions if you go onto our toolbox, which is that resource that I have on your handout. And it will tell you those particular things. So before we go, we just have a few more minutes. And I want to also share with you that the Master Gardeners are always looking for new people to join us. And we are going to have an information meeting at the Cooperative Extension Office in Manio on February the 21st at 6 p.m. You can either stop in to talk with somebody or give us a call if you have a question. Also, if you are thinking that you want to maybe join our group, we'll be happy to take your information and we will contact you. But I wanted you to be aware of all of that. I also asked if you would please fill out the evaluation sheet and put on there any subjects of interest that you have, because we are always updating our library of programs. And sometimes it's easy if somebody comes up with an idea and we don't have to say, I wonder what everybody wants to hear about. So if you would do that, that would be appreciated. So I thank all of you. Yes. Well, now the extension website is the second one that is listed on your handout. The other ones, Clemson is also another site that is very good with information. And some of these others are books that we have used. There is the North Carolina Extension Gardener's Handbook. That is available. Here, you can also check that out of the library. They have one of those copies here in the library. And, you know, if you're looking for the trees and shrubs, this is a book that we use for that as well.
I'd just like to give a shout out to your toolbox, North Carolina State.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So we've gotten a shout out about our toolbox from the audience that says it is great if you're looking for a particular plant. The other, I will tell you something else about that toolbox. It's not only good just for a particular plant, to look up a particular plant, but if you're trying to decide what to put in a pollinator garden, or if you're trying to put in a certain type of thing, deer resistant plants, they actually have a search engine there that you can put that in there and the list will come up of plants that satisfy that particular need. So, I mean, it's not just looking up the name of a particular plant. You can, it's used for a lot of different ways. So I want to thank you.
Thank you. Give you a shout out.
Yeah. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Oh, so you don't have to hear everything I have to say?